joined today by Shaheer Hafeez, who is Associate Director of ESG Strategy in KPMG. You're in London, Shaheer?
I am, yes.
Yeah, great, good stuff. We'll start off with an easy one. We're here to talk about ESG. We're here to talk about ESG, what it means in the corporate world, and also future trends. But if someone was to ask you, Shaheer, how best to describe ESG, how would you describe it?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. So I guess, fundamentally, when I think about ESG, it's, environmental, social, and governance. Those are the sort of three pillars of ESG when we talk about it. And it's essentially, how you conduct business in the right way. So the E, which is the environmental part, it's about, what is a business's impact on the planet, but also what is the planet's impact on you? So, are you addressing climate change? Are you addressing kind of climate change? Are you thinking about the natural resources you consume, the impact of waste that you produce as a business? But equally, are you considering the lack of, say, biodiversity and what impact that has on the business? So if you're a farming business, biodiversity leads to lower crop production, which obviously then impacts your business from a revenue point of view. The S pillar, the social pillar, it's more about sort of, do you consider and work with the communities you operate in? So as a business, you obviously have a license to operate socially, but just making sure, is your business inclusive? Do you pay fair taxes? Do you treat customers ethically? Do you treat your suppliers ethically? Do you have employees? Do employees have safe working conditions? Can they speak up if they see something wrong? So it's all about sort of, how you interact with the communities and the different stakeholders within those communities that you operate. And then finally, the G pillar, it's about sort of how you conduct yourself as a business. So, this goes beyond complying with sort of UK corporate governance code or, the way it's principles, but this is about having a kind of diverse leadership having kind of that genuine points of views and experiences to hold the business to account to make sure, it's doing the right thing. And, I think I'd say it's overall ESG isn't anything kind of specific for a business. It's very much everything that a business does and how it does it. And it should incorporate it incorporates all parts of the business.
Yeah, very good. And we hear a lot about ESG at the moment. What sort of interest and demand are you seeing from clients when it comes to ESG? What do they want to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I suppose it's there's a spectrum of issues that clients are facing from an ESG point of view. I'd say at the kind of very top level, it's about helping come up with an ESG ambition or a strategy that allows them to sort of translate the three pillars into their business, and how that strategy then links in with sort of their business strategy. Because ultimately, for any business, ESG, as I said, it's not kind of a specific topic, but it needs to kind of be really plugged into the business itself. And so at the top level, I'd say there's kind of a lot around the strategy and the interconnectivity between the business and the ESG elements. But we're getting requests in terms of the work. We're getting requests for more specific pieces of the puzzle as well. So we've got a lot of work around climate risk and decarbonization, like helping clients on their net zero journeys. All the governments have a net zero plan now, and therefore businesses need to do something about it. We get clients asking us to help them review their supply chain and making sure that the entire kind of ecosystem is kind of adhering to ESG principles, and it's not just kind of their business, but also the businesses that they interact with are also kind of complying with similar principles. And then finally, I'd say there's kind of a wave of regulation, both currently enforced and upcoming, that businesses need to comply with. The Task for Climate Disclosure, the TCFD, that's one of the key ones at the moment, that if you're a listed business, you need to You need to have a clear plan for TCFD compliance. And then there's kind of other regulation as well that's sort of in place that companies often reach out to us for support.
Yeah, and it does seem that it's a very active environment and agenda, and companies are embracing it. What ESG trends are emerging?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think if I think back to, say, I don't know, maybe like 5-6 years ago, ESG was more about it, the world was more about CSR, corporate social responsibility, and it was more about charities and donations and that kind of activity. And what we've seen over the kind of last few years is the dramatic shift driven by a lot of stakeholders. So when you think about it, there's a newer generation of customers now. They have a greater scrutiny on ethical performance of businesses, and they expect businesses to embed ESG at the core of their organizational purpose and operations. And quite frankly, I think a lot of customers are willing to pay more for ethical products as well, right? So there's a kind of customer-driven trend towards ESG. Regulators are showing a greater interest within that ESG landscape. Like we just talked about kind of reporting requirements, and that's increasingly, that's increasing gradually. There's currently requirements under the UK Companies Act, talked about TCFD, and there's kind of more forthcoming regulation. And investors and lenders, I think they are also a key. So investors recognize their stewardship responsibilities, and they're using their actively using their rights to influence corporate activities. L&G, Legal & General, they announced that they will vote against reappointment of the nomination committee chairman for any S&P 500 or FTSE 100 companies who do not appoint a non-white director by 2022. Now, that's quite a bold statement, and I think there's a lot more sustainability considerations rising among investors, and as a result, that's placing pressures on companies and holding them accountable for managing their ESG risks. And finally, I'd say there's just kind of business trends, right? There's kind of resource scarcity, there's pressure on margins, and the fact is, like, the cost of inaction does hurt a business. And so as a management, you just need to, there's a natural kind of shift towards doing things better, because it could lead to higher revenue generation, more cost efficiencies for a business.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you make. A lot of the pressure came initially from investors, but it also can come from customers. It can come from the next generation of people who are going into organizations, but also consuming products. And on the face of it, ESG appears to be a very good thing. But are there any weaknesses in the area, such as we hear greenwashing, for example?
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's definitely a trend of, well, I think I would say there was perhaps a bit more of a greenwashing in the past initially, I think, but as businesses and kind of get to grips of more around what ESG is and what the expectations are, I think that we hope so, that kind of trend changes into real tangible action. And I think that's where the investor kind of influence does help support sort of the broader ESG agenda. Because, quite frankly, if in today's world, if you're greenwashing as a business, then you will get caught out at some point, company, either through sort of investors or kind of your employees or even your customers. Some people do realize the difference between, just plain talk versus tangible action. And I suppose as a business, if you're approaching ESG, that's quite a critical thing to do. It's not just now, it's not just about, it's not just about releasing a statement saying we'll be net zero by 2030. It's more about like communicating how exactly you will get to that point, like what is the clear, like communicating a clear roadmap, and just identifying how you would address the risks and challenges, and then working out and having a clear plan that people sort of buy into, because that shows your commitment and that shows the seriousness of your commitment to stakeholders.
Yeah, so there's no place to hide really. You will be discovered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, some firms would see ESG as a threat, but others see it as an opportunity. Are there opportunities for firms if they embrace it in a genuine way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think I said earlier, ESG needs to be embedded within your business strategy. If you think about ESG as a kind of standalone siloed topic, then, you would, it doesn't necessarily work that well. And so, ESG, linking in ESG into your products and services is critical. And then, as a business, you can identify commercial opportunities. You can think around, how ESG gives you access to potentially new markets. So if you think of, the asset managers and a lot of the kind of investment money was essentially, the baby boomer generation. And what we've seen is that in order to target millennials and later generations, asset managers have come up with, created a lot of ESG driven funds. And, and that's kind of created it's a whole new customer segment that you need to target. Equally, I think, as mentioned before, customers are willing to pay a premium for ethical and sustainable products and services. And so translating the ESG principles into your business strategy is quite critical to be able to access sort of, new sources of revenues or just great new markets.
Yeah, so it's the tide is rising, so you may as well get on the boat and go with it. Finally, Shaheer, the future, is ESG enough? For example, we've been asked that question before, but what does the future hold when it comes to ESG? And what can boards and their directors expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation and one we have quite a lot within my team. And, I think if you're a business, I think ESG is a growing trend. And as you said, it's a rising tide and there's no way to hide from it. And so you just need to embrace it. But what I would say is that the key thing is to embrace it with authenticity. And, it's quite I'd say authenticity and transparency are the two key pillars of how you demonstrate ESG. You don't want to overpromise, but equally, you don't want to go down the greenwashing route. And so if you're the board, or like kind of as a business, when you're thinking about ESG, I would say, focus on the material risks for the business. No one's expecting a business to solve world peace. There's no kind of, you don't have to necessarily figure out all 20 challenges and work out like how to solve each of those challenges. Inherently, as a business, there will be some ESG factors that you contribute more to than others. If you're an energy company, obviously climate change is more kind of top of your priority than, say, if you're an information services company where you're not necessarily contributing to climate change as much as an energy company. And so focus on the material risks for the business, but have that holistic view of the risks. So don't just think about how you as a business contribute to how you as a business could influence ESG, but how sort of the more macro ESG risks influence your business. I'd say have an ESG strategy that's authentic and it's embedded in your business strategy. Have a clearly defined problem, what the business wants to achieve and why it wants to achieve that. Understand what you're strong, where you are strong and where you can be proud of, but also know where you're vulnerable and then address those head on rather than kind of hide those facts away. Have a clear roadmap. As I said, it's no longer good enough to have a great strategy. It's more and more important to say how the business will address sort of the risks and challenges. Explaining that gives your shareholders, investors, comfort that you know how to address those risks. But more importantly, you can do it proportionally and effectively. And also, building out this detail provides insights into how that ESG element really connects with the business strategy. And then having a plan and communicating that plan is critical. So again, don't make it an internal document that only management can see, but put it out in your annual reports, put it out on your website, put it out in your communications. And finally, I'd say, have clear metrics and targets, both sort of short-term and longer-term targets, measure performance against those targets and show progress to stakeholders. Metrics will also help, compare your business to other businesses, and then you can sort of show real progress. I think that's sort of, when you're thinking about that. And ultimately, I think as a board, as a kind of executive group, utilize the strengths of the group. The key thing that, I think that whilst you might have someone leading from the top, you might have the CEO or someone leading from the top, the key thing is about how do you spark innovation and ensure that the business is truly resilient. Having a diversity of the board, having diversity within the organization, different ideas and knowledge drives different sort of better decisions, avoiding herd mentality, having a culture that people can speak up and challenge the business and how it does things. That's truly very important, because you can have the best ESG strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right kind of culture, if you don't have the right kind of policies and procedures to support that, then that strategy then gets lost within within the business. And so I'd say, have that strategy, have the kind of roadmap and targets, but also make sure that it's actually embedded within the organization. And it's more than just about policies and procedures. I think it's about the culture. It's about individual ownership and accountability. It's about business empowerment.
Yeah, very good. Listen, that's great advice, Shaheer. Thanks again. Thanks for joining me today. And
Pleasure.
we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks again, Shaheer.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.